believe it. I got through. Greg, Brian, you're not going to believe what I found. Before you ask about how my family's doing, especially with respect to my youngest daughter, now I think about a month old, I should let you know that I am wondering the same thing, in fact. And that's because I'm standing before an important discovery of great scientific and rhetorical interest. Somewhere deep in the heart of the Hoh rainforest on the peninsula. How I got here? It's anybody's guess. I vaguely remember feeding my daughter formula from a bottle, half awake, half asleep, at some point near the dawn. And then I heard the siren song, carried across the angry sound, whispering secrets indecipherable but intoxicating into my sleep-deprived ears. The next thing I knew, I was driving off the ferry in Kingston, and the sun had nearly risen. I was no longer in control, but moving by the force of some divine hand. And it's been like that for countless days and nights. As I hacked my way through the dense underbrush, phone battery nearly empty of charge, soaked by the cold rain, following the ancient hymn as though possessed. That is, until today, when I finally found the damn thing. It's some kind of gate, or maybe a tomb. I can't be sure. There's a strong, skunky odor. It seems to come from a gray fog seeping through the cracks. A dense moss has grown over the entrance, and it's taken me all day to clear the face of the stone to get a good look at this thing. So I'm gonna tell you what I see. It looks like there's some kind of an inscription. It's like a book with strange glyphs, maybe a tome of spells, or a forbidden history. There's something that looks like a brain, but it's completely smooth. It's attached to what looks like a frail, thin being who's using it as a chair or throne? And at the center, there's this hole, but it's filled with darkness, the likes of which I have never seen before. Naturally, I wanted you two, my podcast co-hosts, dearer to me than anything else on this planet, to be the first to know about what was happening and to be part of this historic moment with me. The moment when I open it. My God, it's full of definitions. I can't believe it, the power. It's amazing, just incredible. Dictionary upon dictionary, definition upon definition. Enough rhetorical weaponry to smite all enemies on the battlefield of the discourse with an old, strict, exacting language, brimming with rigid terminology and usage. Here, in this prescriptivist paradise, words have meaning. They have meaning. It's... No, damn you. It can't be. Her power, the void, it's the absence of all thought. What have I done? My God, my family, my co-hosts, please, forgive me. Forgive me.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Seattle Sucks podcast. And it's great hearing from...
What is the Seattle Sucks podcast?
The podcast about the city we
Nope,
hate.
that's not it. That's not Colin. Colin, seriously, we need you back. It's the podcast about hating the city we love.
And by the way, thanks for sending us that message, Colin. Sounds like things are going great out there. All right, so we're back on the boat. And by boat, of course, I mean my house, which is a boat for the land. And it's me and Greg. We're going to talk a little bit later about Greg's feelings vis-a-vis McMuffins, because we haven't heard that enough. And about various conspiracy theories we might be harboring vis-a-vis the CHOP, SPD, and our mayor and police chief. But before we get to all that, we have a very good interview about the Seattle Police Officers Guild getting kicked out of the MLK Labor Council fucking finally. We're interviewing Anna Hackman and Whitney Kahn, two people who helped organize for that, and very nice people.
Yeah, this is a really good interview. Enjoy. Here it is. Okay, hey, everybody, we are here to talk about SPOG getting shit canned from the MLK Labor Council. We have with us Anna Hackman and Whitney Kahn. Anna is a rank-and-file member of American Federation of Teachers Local 1789 and teaches in the Humanities program at Seattle Central College. Whitney Kahn is a shop steward with Seattle Education Association and is a special education paraeducator as well as a member of Seattle DSA. Both of them were involved in organizing to urge the MLK Labor Council to expel SPOG. We have them here now to talk about that. Friends, comrades, what's going on with SPOG? I mean, why get rid of SPOG?
Good question. Yeah, I think this question was really kind of emerging at this time of this larger movement around these demands to defund SPD, to redivert those funds towards community and social services, and to really kind of, as like Angela Davis put it in her speech to the Oakland longshoremen, to really reimagine what policing and security can look like. And these kind of critical questions emerged about SPOG, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, and that their membership in the Labor Council, and should they be part of the Labor Council, can we legitimately call them workers, and what are the roles of police in a capitalist state? And so, I think where we were kind of coming from with this is that, if we want to look at police as workers in the context of, they work for a wage and a pension. Okay, but it's about where the similarities end. Like, really, what they are is that they're tools for protecting capital. They're tools for protecting a racial capitalist order, and so they're the ones who are, they're agents of repression. They're the ones who are coming down on us when we're organizing. We're seeing that right now in Capitol Hill. It's about to happen right now at CHOP. And so, when kind of coming from that perspective, like, you can't even. They just have no place in our movement, and they have no place in labor and no place in the Labor Council. And so we thought it was important to get them out.
Yeah, and I mean, SPOG is this sort of like relatively new entry into the Labor Council, right? They're brought in 2014. But
yeah, they should have never been in there in the first place. Yeah,
and I think there's some interesting things I'd like to ask you guys about. So like in 2018, right, when there was the vote on the SPOG contract, the NAACP, the Community Police Commission, the ACLU, all, and many organizations said vote no on this contract. But the Labor Council, like, almost by itself, basically was like, vote yes on the SPOG contract, right? There was even an account of some of the Labor Council members like wearing SPOG shirts for this contract vote. I mean, just completely threw in the fucking toilet what meager police reforms had happened in the previous 8 years. And, not even, basically a year and a half later, the Labor Council is kicking SPOG out of the Labor Council, right? And saying that, a racist organization like the SPOG can't, share in the House of Labor. So what has happened in that interim, right? From cheering for the police, this awful police contract, to kicking them out of the Labor Council?
I mean, it's the same thing that's happened across the country. This huge movement that's burst out has finally cracked the shell of all the powerful institutions in our country who, for iterations, since 2012 of these uprisings, have held the line and finally their wall is cracking. That's a sea change. It's not like the labor leaders have changed. These are the same labor leadership of this council
That's
that
key.
decided to give SPOG a community service award at their labor Oscars for like volunteer of the year.
Fucking cool. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome
just-
job, guys. Well, yeah, I think that is like a super important thing as we're like looking around at this movement and the sort of small but material gains that are actually being made. It's sort of important to, if we're going to stand here and say like, yes, action in the streets is working, direct action is making the system, as you say, like crack, and at least some of these things get through, to analyze that is important. And like the dynamics that are going on. And I think what you said is very important, Whitney, that this is the same people, the same council, the same leadership in there. So it's not as if it's not as if this is like some new personnel that have come in and have different politics. This is people who
So surge from below.
Exactly. They're being forced is the point, right?
Absolutely. And one thing to stress about the way that this happened really is, like, Anna and I think have done really good organizing together, but we're also nothing special. And what all the folks who came together to make this rally happen, we had this big rally right while the meeting was going on. It was really, this thing came together so quickly because it was already happening. Everyone we talked to, when Anna and I bumped into each other, one of these protests, these conversations were already happening. It was the movement bleeding into, labor unions, which is honestly where things should, like, the labor unions could be so powerful leading the fight against racism. And instead, for the past years, like you just outlined with SPOG, sometimes they've been actively against it. The only ones calling for approving this horrific contract. Like, that's a betrayal of Black and brown workers, right? Who are working.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you guys are union teachers, as is Brian.
Yep.
Right on.
Maybe
Okay.
take us, maybe, to dive into this, then we maybe need to ask and maybe help our audience, our listeners know, what the fuck is the MLK Labor Council? Does anyone want to take that?
I'll do it quick because I agreed to do this beforehand. The MLK Labor Council is is all the unions, all the labor unions around King County. They basically get together and they make decisions together. Now, 100 years ago, it was called the Seattle Labor Council, and they led a general strike in this city that shut things down for 5 days, that had a workers' control over all the necessary products and movement of things like milk and childcare and all sorts of things. It's fallen a long way since then, just as the labor movement has in general. But that's basically what it is. It's just like a council of all the unions, which right now is not an organizing body, which I think it should be. It's right now doesn't stand on the right side for a lot of things, and just, but that doesn't mean it's stuck in that way forever, I think, too.
That was kind of really our issue and sort of what mobilized us to kind of get this rally started. Because I think, like Whitney was saying, we really kind of had a very small part in the grand scheme of things. A lot of people were already doing a lot of work, like, AFT, so a lot of us were pushing our union to vote to expel. High Core of the HEA had circulated this petition calling on BIPOC BIPOC union workers to sign to vote to expel. The delegates were already taught. There was all this stuff happening. But I think Whitney was making an important point that it's not an organizing body. And that's where we were running into a lot of issues as we were kind of trying to bring this together, because all of these different pockets were kind of trying to find their way in. It's like this really kind of heavy bureaucratic system that we're all trying to kind of make our little inroads in. How do we get in? How do we figure out the procedures? And in this time when we're having this upswell of youth in Capitol Hill who are getting tear gassed, it's like, we're really kind of tired of our labor council and of labor really in general being on the wrong side of history. So rather than trying to find a way in, let's try to find a way to bring the MLK, the Labor Council, out to us and out to the movement and hold itself accountable to us. So if they're going to kind of do those same kind of backroom deals, they have to do it in front of us.
Yeah. Well, it seems like, you, Whitney, you mentioned the history of the Seattle Labor Council, the world historic Seattle General Strike. These are great things, as a model for union cross union solidarity obviously like makes a lot of sense in general. It seems like by what we're saying here, the fact that they endorse the SPOG contract, also refused to endorse Shama Swan and Sean Scott last time around, who were critical
largely
of
because of their views on the police.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Very critical of SPD and that contract in particular. So it seems like really what they have been, at least for a long time, is a device for sheepdogging union activism in this town, right? Like taking what could be labor movement, militancy, and tamping it down, conglomerating it into something that can be controlled by business interests. So my question then is, like, both of you mentioned that it's not an organizing body. Since we know what it is now, what do you mean by that? What would it look like for it to become an organizing organization?
Well, I mean, I would say this debate isn't new, right? This is sort of the oldest debate in the labor movement. It goes all the way back to the first labor unions, which were largely segregated, dominated by skilled workers, who said the role of labor unions is to carve out a certain position for our members where they have a better life under capitalism, and sort of everyone else, meh, we'll do the best we can. And then there's the more sort of socialist tradition, militant tradition, industrial workers position, like all of these folks that came in and said, no, no, no. Unions need to fight for the whole working class. They need to fight on all the issues. And we're seeing that now in like Chicago, say, with the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, CORE, which led strikes there, took over, said we're going to bargain for the common good. We're going to bring the community in with this. There's similar things with educators all over the Red State Revolt. And here in Seattle, we've got in Highline, the educators who started this petition, they were part of what they call High Core. They were organized and were able to put forward that petition because they were organized that helped to galvanize this upswell of people who wanted to do something but didn't have a way forward. And so what does it look like for it to be an organizing body? I think it looks like really taking on that that strategy, which I think is not going to come from just trying to convince the existing leaders. I think they have their strategy largely, and it's not a uniform thing. But those that do, they have their more strategy based on alliances with the police, alliances with corporate Democrats, alliances with the bosses to try to get a better deal. And it means a different strategy coming through, and it's going to come up from below. And it's going to come up through movements like this and through people trying to use their unions as a tool to address the issues happening to them in our capitalist society. And that process has been the only process I've seen in history that can actually sort of have a massive reforms or a political revolution within the labor movement to make it sort of the fighting movement that it needs to be, and have a basis that our power doesn't come from being at the table. Our power comes from organizing the wider working class around those issues and having that power in the streets and in our workplaces and communities.
Yeah, exactly. I think that this is a really good example of when workers are strong, the labor movement is strong. I mean, the thing with the Labor Council is, like I said before, it was so bureaucracy heavy that even a lot of the delegates that we were in contact with were having kind of a hard time kind of maneuvering, like, what's going to happen and how does this tabling thing work? Like all of these little bits and pieces, which that's kind of what bureaucracies are designed to do. Like they're kind of the antithesis of labor movement organizing. And what I think was really helped us is that we were already organizing as workers. Like, members of my union, we were already talking and already kind of preparing because we're anticipating some real shit coming down the pike because of COVID-19 and the way that that's restructured the conditions of our labor. And High Core was already organizing. And so we were all already kind of organized and mobilized as rank and file workers. A lot of us don't, we have a lot of affiliations, but a lot of us don't necessarily have a real formal position in our unions, for example. But like Whitney said, we're all kind of starting to think about how can we use our union as a tool to really kind of push. Because I think that's the only way that the entities like the MLK Labor Council is really going to change, is that when we're organized from below, we can really kind of push them forward. And I think that that's at least partly what we did with this rally last Wednesday too.
Yeah, like as we've mentioned, like the labor movement is not what it once was. You mentioned the Labor Council position being sort of aligned with corporate Democrats. The Democratic Party, since the 70s, sort of turned its back on labor, but they will continue to use labor and this sort of vague idea of the labor movement and unions as sort of props. And it's we're seeing, now there's been a success here with the MLK Labor Council, but when people around the country are talking about the sort of malignant force that is cop unions, and I'd like to hear from you guys. What is but we're seeing pushback on that. Like, well, guys, these are unions we're talking about. Everyone deserves representation, collective bargaining, and maybe some people are even saying, well, guys, cops are workers too. They're working class members of our community. What you and the organizers working with you and other people on the in labor in this town who have successfully shit canned SPOG from the council must have a concise rebuttal to that. A reason, like why don't we have to look at SPOG and these cop unions as part of the labor movement and worthy of any consideration in that regard?
Well, I don't know if I'd say worthy of any consideration, but
Okay.
like Anna said, they do have a paycheck, and a lot of it, that's where the similarities end. In terms of what does it mean to be a worker? Working people, even if their politics are horrible right-wing politics, right? They produce things that is necessary, right? If we have 2,000 new educators, we'll have better education. If we have 2,000 new iron workers, we can get some Green New Deal infrastructure done, perhaps. If we have 2,000 new cops, what do we get? Do we get more food? Do we get more housing? We don't get anything for that. And so in that way, their only job fulfillment is for enforcing the status quo relationships we have in society and keeping those forcibly there. And so when you say that, well, that's their job, well, how are you in solidarity with them as workers at their job when their job is to go and over police Black and brown communities and terrorize them into mass incarceration? I mean, how do you do that and stand in solidarity with Black and brown workers, right? This is the Black Lives Matter movement. This is not the I hate cops movement, but you've got to pick a side. And I think on Wednesday, they picked their side.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's one of those sort of important things to remember too, that police unions really didn't come into vogue until the 60s, right? And, other things happening at the time sort of brought them into existence, which was the civil rights movement and a growing fear that there might be some sort of retribution for the crimes that the police were engaging in and were being highlighted across the country. And I mean, they really did come into existence to protect individual officers for brutalizing the working class. And at some point, you just have to say, no, you guys don't get to play.
Yeah, they're not organizing for the same thing. They may... Exactly. They're not collectively bargaining for the same thing that anyone else is. They're collectively bargaining to avoid prosecution for murder. I mean, that's basically what they do.
Yeah, collectively bargaining for the right to kill without consequence. Which I think
I've never heard of a nurse bargaining for that.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So I wanted to ask a real quick question, though, union related to you guys, though, since you guys are both teachers. I am in the AFT in Snohomish, but we filled out all the forms and the letters and had the push or whatever to kick SPOG out, the next county down. And it is one of those things that as a teacher, right, you do have this weird relationship with the police through your students, right? Either the police are in your school if you happen to be in a public school, like at the high school I teach at, or the relationship your students have with the police just in their everyday lives. And I was just curious how that affected y'all talking to people in the AFT and the SEA.
Yeah, I think the realities of mass incarceration are like very real to the students at Seattle Central in a very particular way. A lot of them have direct relationships with the youth jail on 12th, for example, right? Whether they've been incarcerated there themselves or know people who have been involved in the No New Youth Jail campaign, and have very real real direct experience with policing and police brutality in their everyday lives, being pulled over, being held at gunpoint. It's a very real fear and a very real level of violence from police that they have to kind of deal with every single day. And it's what brought many of those students out into Capitol Hill for 10 days in a row, getting tear gassed, getting hit with flashbangs, and just experiencing that violence on another level. And it's also really, again, this isn't like a new thing. This is like 30 plus years of neoliberal austerity where, police are like kind of like the one public institution that's been getting all this funding, while things like their public education has been slowly retrenched for like in these kind of like fiscal starvation policies that have just taken away really any real educational resource that they have. So they're dealing with this kind of dual thing of this reduction of funding for their education, while at the same time being really quite literally funneled into the prison system through that very institution that's supposed to be educating them, to the point that you almost can't even really tell the difference between a school and a prison.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in Seattle and a lot of these schools, like we've got, it's not just the students and what their relationship is to the police, it's the students acting on this relationship and organizing some of these protests, right? Like it's educators following the lead of these students. At Franklin High School, it was the student body who met, and one of my coworkers who's a teacher there, she said, hey, this was right after George Floyd was killed. She said, what do you want to do? Do you want to have like a roundtable discussion or something? And they said, no, we're done talking. We want to go into the streets. We want to make something happen. And they organized a protest of over 500 people outside of Franklin to take Rainier Avenue. It was super powerful. And so educators in Seattle caught up, and we actually passed a number of resolutions at our last union rep assembly, where one of them said, we're formally taking the stand that cops need to be out of Seattle schools.
Yeah, right on. That's really important. I don't know if you, the listeners at home, and Anna and Whitney, Brian has just published an article on the history of police and schools on our blog, mechanicalfreak.website. Pretty thorough history. And then he recorded
Was that the one on the last?
Yeah, it's the last episode on the podcast feed is him reading that.
That was a really good article. I learned a lot.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
I learned about what the origin of community policing was. That it was actually a way to put cops into the schools.
Yeah.
Oh, it's real dark.
Yeah.
It's dark.
Don't worry. They learned it from Camp Pendleton due to their experiences with strategic hamlets in Vietnam. So,
whereas today they send them to Israel to oversee the apartheid state there.
Well, I thought the really nice sort of balance in the universe was the police, in order to develop the modern policing paradigm, were, going to Marines fresh out of Vietnam and like telling them like, oh, how do you kill people in Vietnam? Because that's what we want to do in LA. And then when the United States invaded Iraq again in 2003, they actually brought in LAPD SWAT officers and trainers to train the Marines and the U.S. military on how to like how to kick doors in, how to make arrests and all that. And I thought that was a nice sort of snake eating its tail, or I don't know what that is.
The word you're looking for, Brian, is empire.
Yeah, right.
But it's a whole nice to see, people coming together.
Yeah. Something like that.
You hear sort of a lot of times people are like, they need more training. But this is the sort of training they're getting. Do you really want them getting more of this?
Yeah.
And I think that's why defund has become a really powerful thing that people have put out there to say, no, we don't want more. It's not, we want less.
Exactly.
Yeah, the defund, I think the defund, reinvest paradigm, these demands, I think are really great. I think it tells a story. One of the things Brian sort of details in that piece is talking about how, in addition to the overall police budget, the cops in the schools, this is mind blowing if you've never heard this before. Because police, they're out on the beat, they're sitting in their cars, they're doing their shit. But if anyone asks them, including other city departments, ask them to be anywhere specific, or if they want to be anywhere specific, they're taking that out of that budget. So all those SROs in Seattle schools are getting paid out of the Seattle.
It usually comes out of the school budget or the city budget, but it's a way to like, covertly redirect funds to the police. It's fucking amazing.
I mean, who knows how it is in the city? I don't know. But yeah, in a lot of cities, it's taken out of the school system budget to pay those cops to be there. So that's more money in addition to sort of the other choices over time. That's hidden money that isn't represented in a police budget and is a chunk out of an education budget that is going to the cops. That is just like it's unbelievable. It's some wild shit.
And in
Mhm.
Seattle, every dollar that goes to the police is hidden. Like if you've seen in past
Yeah.
years, the budget, the city budget is about 1,000 pages long. The huge portion that goes to the police, it was 7 lines of text. And you can look at it from past budgets. Like it's 7 lines of text, just like East Precinct, $92 million or whatever it is. No
Mhm.
questioning, no oversight, no audit, just blank checks being written year after year. And I'm sure massive fraud up and down within that sort of black box of a budget.
Well, fraud and just, brutality
Mhm.
from the point of a credit card, right? Like, they're spending on whatever they think their job is, and we know what that is, let's talk about the actual organizing effort here that the two of you were involved in, and then what other people in the labor movement locally did to actually make. Obviously, like we know, as we talked about, there's this enormous wave of pressure sort of nationally, in some ways that maybe made this sort of a low-hanging fruit for the labor council, but organizing happened on the ground to actually make sure this happened, and we know the both of you were involved in that. So Anna, can you tell us about the specific things that you were involved in, and then maybe you guys can talk about like what was going on more generally?
Yeah. So originally, a group of us within my union AFT, we were already kind of starting to talk and organize around COVID-19 because these like really kind of massive changes to our working conditions. Like we knew that, and a lot of things were kind of coming down the pike from administration, and so we were really kind of starting to think about how can we build pressure as rank and file organizers to really move forward. And so when we started seeing the high core petition circulating, a lot of us started putting pressure on our union to vote to expel. And like Whitney was saying earlier, there was like all of these little pockets kind of going on and of organizing already happening from all of these different camps. And really what brought it all together was this movement, this Black Lives Matter movement and Decriminalize Seattle and the people who started CHOP, who created the space that was just kind of bringing people together. So like, even though Whitney and I have organized together off and on for several years now. It was really, we were both at CHOP on the same day and ran into each other. So like we were pushing our union, High Core had, released that petition. SEA, Whitney's union, had just written this like great resolution, I think like the day before that we ran into each other. And so we start talking about kind of all of these different pieces and decide that really what we need to do is we need to get all of these different people together in one space and talk about how to move forward. And so we decided it was the Sunday before. So it was like to meet at Cal Anderson Park. So on June 14th to prepare for this June 17th meeting. And like I was saying before, it was really about, rather than try to find a way into the Labor Council, we need to find a way to bring the Labor Council out to us and really make this meeting public and really make it transparent. So we were kind of talking about all different types of ideas that we might do that. And we kind of finally settled on a rally and kind of open mic to have people come to speak, to kind of share their experiences, why we needed to kick SPOG out, but to also share their experiences with policing and kind of connecting what was happening with getting SPOG out to the larger movement. And so from there, was really kind of at least on my end was, and Whitney's end too, was a lot of the logistics of kind of keeping everyone in communication, kind of getting the space set up, the working out the sound, working kind of like what was like technically possible with like all the tech and projectors and things that we were going to need. And mobilizing our union members and everyone that we could to get out there and solid, not just to get SPOG out, but to really stand in solidarity with the demands of the movement to defund SPD, to redirect those funds towards community and social services, and to really force the Labor Council and really the labor movement as a whole to really decide which side of history it wants to be on this time. Does it want to continue doing this bureaucratic, like kind of pandering to corporate Democrats like it's been doing? Or does it want to stand on the side of the movement and on the side of Black and Brown and Indigenous lives? And yeah, and so then that was the rally was kind of our way of kind of bringing all of those things together.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, well, it sounds like, it was effective. Are you guys aware of what was happening inside any of the other unions in the council? Like, how much organizing was going on, like, outside of teachers?
Some of it, I did not know that there was a big thing in Snohomish AFT, for example. But some of it we do know about, and outside of educators, I think UFCW 21, who represents the a lot of service workers. There were WOOFC, AFSME, it's like public sector workers generally, everyone from the janitors to UW to a whole host of SEIU locals and stuff all ended up voting in favor. I know that in Unite Here and other places, there were all these conversations just happening up and down the chain. At some places, they had votes like what we had with resolutions, and others, it was just a big pressure campaign where I heard from from a union that the president who was in favor of it of UAW 4121 said like he has too many emails. He couldn't even get through it, and I think that's really at the core of it. There were a few educators in Highline who kicked it off. There were other educators and other workers and people from different socialist groups and what have you who helped to pull things together and say, hey, we should have a rally to organize it to be a beacon. And everything else was people just quickly trying to compare notes and trade language and just sort of have whatever push they could. And the whole thing was start to finish was, I mean, within 2 weeks, everything had happened. And so it was a real whirlwind. It wasn't like a systematic campaign. It was a movement. And it was the movement for Black lives being expressed by people trying to use their unions to get something done.
Yeah, I think, one of the themes on this show, the past few weeks has been that, what things have happened are because people are in the street, right? What things happen is because the pressure is being put on in the street. And that even includes, I mean, the same, as we said, the same people in the the MLKLC who were applauding SPOG a year and a half ago are now kicking them out. That's only because of what happens in the streets, right? I think that's a powerful sort of thing we have to sort of keep in mind.
Yeah, and these victories, these little individual victories, like kicking SPOG out of the Labor Council, are necessary to maintain that momentum and to show even people outside of the movement where the momentum is. To show everyone in the country, in the community, in the country that things are going to change, right? So hopefully this is just one in a long list of small victories that will lead to firing half of SPD or more and making them like register for life. Anyway, well, that's a whole other conversation.
I mean, if
okay,
a police officer kills people or brutalizes them or is subject for hate crimes and stuff, shouldn't they have to? I think they should have to be. You should be able to know who in your neighborhood is a predator like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. So this victory, again, we've said it several times, it's the same leadership in at the council who have been forced by the constituent unions and the rank and file to make this happen. What does that look like for the future of the Labor Council? Like, we've seen over the last few years, long before this particular moment and movement, unions, particularly teachers unions around the country, getting more militant, people organizing within them to change leadership, like in LA and Chicago. What does this look like? Have you two heard of any plans anybody has to organize to change leadership at
like I'm part of the Labor Council?
Do you think this is at least a Yeah,
I haven't heard anything specific about the Labor Council themselves and what they plan to do moving forward. But I think that there is something like a conversation to be had about how we can kind of continue that work that we did on the ground and kind of keep that moving forward. Because I think that's kind of what at least I think what Whitney and I came out, and I think many others did too, came out with this, is that what you can do when you really build that pressure from below. And so some of the things that I know that we're kind of talking about are, how do we continue to kind of mobilize our union members to, yeah, we got SPOG out, but it doesn't end here, right? Like, how do we really kind of work in solidarity with the demands of the movement to defund SPD? How do we continue building? We know a little bit about what some of the other unions who voted to expel did, but we don't aren't necessarily in contact with them. How do we build those connections? And so I think the only I don't know what the Labor Council is planning, but I think that there's a lot that we can do to kind of push them in the right direction if we don't lose this momentum, and if we keep working in solidarity with the movement. I think that there's a lot that we can do to push them in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, I just add, I think they're weak now. So it'd be cool to launch some kind of challenge to whoever is on that council, and maybe find someone new.
I would love that. I think it's going to have to be something that also, like you asked earlier, what is the Labor Council? It's a collection of unions. So what does it mean to have a change in leadership in the Labor Council? I think it needs to be a change within the unions themselves too. And I really hope that everybody who organized for this issue goes back to all your coworkers and is like, okay, let's talk. What should we do next? How do we keep this going? What do we want to change in our union? Because it's not just a direct line to the Labor Council. I think different movements can really lead the way. And you mentioned the educators, but there are others. And this big battle is coming in October and in November in Seattle, which is, I think the mayor, after delaying it, says she's going to release the budget proposal next week. And there are going to be cuts coming, right? Because unless they raise money by taxing big corporations, which they're fighting against the tax Amazon thing or whatever, the rest is going to be cuts because of coronavirus. Does the cuts come from special education or from the special forces? Does it come from greenways or grenades? Like, this is where the defund SPD by 50% and put that money into the things that communities, especially communities of color, Black and brown communities, but all working class communities need in order to be safe, healthy, and secure. That's going to be a fight that every union, again, is going to have to say, which side are we on? Because there's no neutral there. And that's something I would say, if people are looking for how to keep this going in their unions and their union hasn't yet taken a stance on this demand, you're absolutely right. They're weak now, and we should do everything we can to use this moment that's built by this movement to try to push things as far as they can. And I think the defund SPD and invest in communities is a really powerful demand, because we're in a racist crisis, racist policing wrapped in a COVID crisis, which is going to come back, which is going to come very, very soon.
Yeah. And, in all the ways that COVID plays into all this, the fact that that it's forcing budget questions on every government in the country is going to be very real. And this moment means there's no way not to have the conversation about cutting police budgets. I mean, that's every mayor in the country, every county board or executive or whatever, every state government, they're all going to be asked the question about cutting money out of the cop budgets. We just trying to think of some final questions here. What about, so you mentioned some of the unions that you knew were organizing. What did any what were do you guys happen to remember the unions that did not vote to remove SPOG?
The big ones were many, but not all, of the building trades. And the machinists. It was interesting. The carpenters.
Oh, the machinists. How interesting, Brian.
To be fair, the machinists never let me into their union either.
Okay. All right. Brian is a machinist. He was never in a machinist union. Okay. We let him off the hook for this one. Go on.
But that's another union that's really been on the retreat for a long time, right? They keep making concessions, and Boeing keeps moving. Yeah. And I just feel like, here's the thing about labor and the strategy is that cozying up to your oppressors is a losing strategy. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And IAM used to be decently militant, and then, just over the last 20 years, I mean, with the help of, say, the state in the form of the governor and stuff, have really broken their back. I mean, that's a whole interesting story.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I think that's the labor movement overall. But these links, I mean, already, like, we're going to have a follow-up meeting with everyone who is involved on Wednesday. But already people are talking about how do we reach out to unions who voted the wrong way? Do we try to strengthen ties with all the unions that voted the right way? How do we sort of grow and dig roots with this new anti-racist, anti-capitalist, labor left that has the possibility here to be built? Because the conservative wing is very organized, right? They're very organized. They're in leadership all over the place. They got their strategy. They got their playbook. But with a movement like this, the left has the ability to make inroads. And do we focus on our own unions, the unions that voted the right way or the unions that voted the wrong way, with an understanding that eventually we're going to have to come for all of it to try to, unite the working class in a way that sees anti-racism and anti-sexism and anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism as things that are of vital interest to the working class.
I guess just to add on to what Whitney just said, I think that there's this issue where we kind of see racism and capitalism as these kind of two separate things, but they're actually just inextricably linked together. And I think what labor is really going to have to come to terms with, that there is no real labor movement that isn't anti-racist, that isn't feminist. It's just so capitalism has always relied on racism and heteropatriarchy in order to function. As like RDG Kelly and Stuart Hall said, they're the modalities through which classes lived. So if we're not talking about a labor movement that is talking about the exploitation of Black and brown lives, then we're not doing enough. And so I think when it comes to that question of these unions who voted to expel, I think the kind of bigger question is, how do we kind of shift how we understand what the labor movement can be to kind of bring it with the times and to bring it more aligned with Black Lives Matter? That's really showing us the way forward.
Yeah, amen. Amen to that. Well, Anna, Whitney, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for the work you're doing. Shout out to all those rank and file union members who got out and made their voices heard about kicking SPOG to the curb, and to those unions that in fact voted to do so. It's kind of a relatively small symbolic thing, but it's important because it shows that this movement can challenge power and can move things, and it's exciting. So, and it's like everything else, it's something that on this podcast we've been talking about for as long as we've had it. Why the fuck is SPOG even associated with the labor movement?
And isn't it such a beautiful thing? People thought it would never ever happen, and then this movement made it happen in 2 weeks flat. What a gorgeous,
exactly
wonderful, inspiring, humbling thing.
Yeah, everything is possible again, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, it did seem even right when this started, it was like, there's no way they'll ever get rid of SPOG. I mean,
too powerful, too big, Goliath. You can't do anything about him.
Yeah,
Yep.
And now they're marginalized, and they know very clearly everyone hates them.
Yeah.
Like it's not ambiguous anymore. Like if they're no cop in America can be confused anymore at this point. At least not in Seattle, where they've literally been kicked out of the labor.
Can you imagine that? Like the thing they did on that first day of the protest with the mourning badges. Let's assume that's true for a second. Imagine going to a protest where people are protesting that cops have killed people, and what you're deciding to wear is a badge about how cops have been killed by people.
Yeah. No, I mean, they're in their own planet, but they're getting a reality check.
And I don't even think that's true, but
bullshit.
I mean, the thinnest lie ever told.
They've been getting so flimsy. It's like they're not even trying right now.
Oh my god, these press conferences. We're gonna tune into the rest of this episode because we're gonna get into this fucking press conference.
Yeah, let's just say 50 years of the police being allowed to say whatever they want and the press just dutifully repeating it has not done well for their ability to cover their asses.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope that
Exactly.
this is the beginning of unions coming out on the right side. How beautiful it would have been if from day one, the unions were out there in their colors, showing that solidarity and support and making those protests bigger, stronger, and safer.
Yeah.
There you go.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Thanks
All
for
right.
coming
Thank
on.
you so much again
Yeah.
for coming on. Anna Hackman, Whitney Kahn, educators and rank and file union members here in Seattle. Thank you. And yeah, keep up the good work.
Back at
Yeah,
you.
thank you for having us.
See you out there. Thanks for having us.
All right, and we're back. So once again, thanks to Anna Hackman and Whitney Kahn for carving some time out to talk with us. And no thanks to SPOG. Fuck you guys.
Yeah, eat shit.
Yeah, eat shit, assholes.
Fucking, what's his name? Mike Sloan?
Oh, yeah, Mike Sullen. Yeah,
Sullen, yeah,
and,
whatever.
and also Kevin Stuckey and Ron Smith and Richard Neal. Fuck all of you.
Yeah.
Fuck the whole bag.
Eat our asses. Everyone hates you.
So, we decided here for this last half of the episode, we do a little conspiracy grab bag because now that Greg is living on my boat, this is all we do now. My house is completely covered in yarn. It's just connecting pictures from the newspaper.
Yeah, well, several times we've been so close to cracking the code. We've been on the edge of it, up, into the wee hours of the night, drinking, Rainier and cherry cola mixed together, just, pacing back and forth. And then we look over, having think we're about to piece it together, and Bryn's knitting a fucking sock out of our work, and it all just evaporates in our minds.
So yeah, we have a couple of things, just some real odds and ends to share. But
yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on. Obviously, we can't really sum it all up, but we can sort of touch in on some of the weirdest stuff here. Obviously, we began to talk about some of it in that interview. What's going on? I mean, I think the Labor Council thing is a big deal. But there's a lot of news.
Yeah. So strap on your tinfoil hat and let's get started. First on the docket, Greg, who ordered the East Precinct to be abandoned?
Okay, so we've talked about this before. It just more like info keeps coming out that basically is just the same thing, which is no one.
No one wants to claim responsibility.
No one wants to claim responsibility, but more than that, it seems like there's just from multiple reports, people on Twitter, but other stuff, we've been reading, like no one in the police department wants to say anything about who possibly ordered that or why or when. And it seems like it was really no one. Like people just God, now it's so long ago since I read this. I forget whose reporting this was, but someone was saying like multiple sources in SPD have told them, shit, now I feel bad. Have told them that like officers have said there were just like text threads, like your basic like coworker text threads that were just like, I don't know, man. I guess we're gonna have to abandon the SPD. And it seems like these just got out of hand because no one anyone has talked to has admitted to or produced any kind of order from command at any level. It seems like, so the natural thing to conclude, and this makes perfect sense, is that they just fucking let this rumor mill spiral. And because there is like chain of command is like not real in a police department because ultimately every officer is empowered to just do it every level, like whatever, and like spend money. The budget's a black box. Within a few hours of this, someone had hired a shredding truck and gotten like moving trucks and were making plans. They were just like, and this makes sense because they're in a, like, they think of themselves as being on a battlefield. They're in a war scenario and like, this is it. The shit's going down. We need to make quick decisions. We need to like
The trench is getting overrun.
Yeah, we need to like, this is when you really show your command potential. You just get shit done. So everyone just started pitching in and enlisting the National Guard to unload the building and leave.
I liked all these just absolute dope National Guard recruits, and they're just like, you guys, you're pack animals.
One of the
Go in
things
and get that shit.
This report, I read this like a week ago, and I really feel bad. I forget who was saying this, but that people were saying that on these text threads, like, just don't report to the East Precinct today. Just go to these other places, The funny thing then to come out is after this is now the police department sent around a memo saying like, Guys, so in the rush to abandon the East Precinct for no reason that no one will claim responsibility for, a lot of stuff was just, haphazardly tossed into patrol cars. We haven't really gotten a lot of that back. So if you could just, look through, not just absolutely accusing no one of anything, because you know what that gets you with a cop. You want to look through your patrol cars, just see if there's any equipment that you could turn into these staging locations, which was like, a parking space at one of the other precincts. Hilarious. I mean, they just, first of all, they've just lost half their shit, but they've just kept.
Yeah.
It was a wholesale theft by the officers in SPD, just stole. There was just a ransacking of the precinct to just shred the documents and steal all the equipment.
So in 2004, when it was like abundantly clear there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, there was this right-wing rumor that the weapons had been ferried into Syria or Iran via, like the military just taking them. And instead of using them to defend themselves, just ferried them into these other countries, of course, setting up the next invasion. But this is real. The CLPD literally just stole all their weapons.
Yeah.
So
well,
if you go to a
whatever else,
CLPD
computers,
officer,
can't just who just fucking there was an evidence locker in that fucking building.
Oh, by the way, if you are on OfferUp and you happen to see somebody trying to unload a computer that probably has like a Blue Lives Matter sticker or something on it, buy that computer. Check the hard drive.
Yes.
I don't know that they probably deleted anything on it.
No, they're too stupid. Yeah, seriously. If you get like any computer device with an SPD like inventory sticker on it,
check it.
Check it. Find where it needs to go. It needs to go to somebody who can get into that data.
Yeah, find a journalist. I'm sure you can find one in this state somewhere. All right, so from I guess our conclusion on who ordered the East Precinct to be abandoned, who knows? But now we get to something a little more serious, which was on Friday. There was a shooting at the CHOP where somebody lost a life, and I feel like a lot of our listeners probably know what happened, but I'll give the quick rundown, which is, there was an argument that escalated. Somebody shot someone, at which point medics in the CHOP got the person, immediately, started providing first aid. They called 911 and asked for an ambulance. The ambulance refused to go to the pre-agreed meeting location and refused to enter the CHOP because it was too dangerous, although apparently it was not too dangerous to be 1 block away. And waited. And in the meantime, while they were trying to get an ambulance, they eventually figured out the ambulance just was not going to come. And so they loaded the person up in a truck and took them to Harborview themselves, where the person later died. SPD then showed up 20 minutes after they left in riot gear. And ever since then, the official line from the mayor's office has been that because SPD couldn't get it because they were met with anger when they showed up at the CHOP. That's why the person died. Forget that the person left, prior to that.
Yeah, well, listen, we watched this press conference today. Durkin and Best both came out there and said, not only because the cops were met with aggressive crowds, but also because of that dastardly tear gas legislation passed by the city council. Oh, lives could have been saved if it weren't for those things.
This one, I think, whereas the thing about the East Precinct was pure stupidity on SPD's part. This, I think, actually is a thing. So the ambulance has gone to that tent, that medics tent before, right? Yes. So they've serviced the medics tent before.
They also just went through it. It's more than that. The fire department just went through with with people at the Chaz and made it happen that they completely rearranged the barricades. They dropped those big concrete barricades running lengthwise down the middle of the streets so that you can still be protected from oncoming drivers by getting to one side of them, but so fire engines and ambulances can drive anywhere in the CHOP. This is agreed and arranged. It should be mentioned that from the start of this, no one has wanted to have any fucking problem with the fire department.
Yeah.
They had an opportunity to not be fucking the errand boys of the fucking cops in this propaganda war here. They could have even taken off their fucking badges in solidarity with people they're supposedly, paid to save. But yeah, that's not what happened, is it?
So the EMT, so this is the first part I want to get to, which is the EMTs waited about a block and a half away close enough that people from the CHOP actually found them and were begging them to go.
Some of the medics
provide aid.
went over there explaining the situation to them, telling them the shooting is over. There's no gunmen left. There's just people dying over here. Please come over here. We need your help.
Yeah, and the EMTs wouldn't budge. Now, the first question is given that the EMTs have gone there before, and given their rather sort of flimsy excuse of we couldn't go, is too dangerous, but apparently not so dangerous we couldn't just sit in our ass a block away. Who ordered them to sit there?
Yeah.
And my guess is SPD.
Yeah, that would be my guess as well. Now, what Chief Scoggins said today at the press conference was, well, because it was a shooting, this is policy. He was asked if this is the policy because it's like, wait, this is something you got to think about it. So medics just won't go anywhere without permission of SPD or before it's been cleared by them. Well, I guess he says because it was, a shooting, a possibly dangerous, possibly active shooter situation, basically saying that the policy is not to go into those kind of locations until they're cleared by the police department. Yeah. And like you said, this is total, maybe this is the policy. That's really, that's some weak shit because, like I said, they were a block away, chilling on Pike and 10th. They were... and they were being told that there was no active shooting.
Close enough that they could talk to people in the event.
Violence had happened at some point previously at this location. They were being told that was not going on. So the fact that those medics, best case, those medics decided in that moment that they were weenies, that they were cowards, and that they would rather fall back on this this subjective policy that they could lean on in this moment than go and save someone's life, in which case fuck them. But there are other possibilities.
And also, again, these were fire department medics, so the issue is apparently the official position of the fire department is if it's dangerous we don't go, in which case why do we have a fire department? But also I think it gets this thing of the police have been fighting this propaganda war around the CHOP now for 2 weeks. And, I imagine for the police, they were just so excited to hear there was a shooting and just so excited to hold that ambulance back, right? Because this was going to be the weapon in the propaganda war they didn't get when they claimed the precinct was going to be burned down, and it didn't happen, right? And so they were just thrilled to get this. And
to let somebody die.
And I think that's the point, right, is that obviously, if you hold an ambulance back after somebody's been shot, a very real consequence, an obvious consequence to even a child of that is that person could die. And SPD was okay with that.
How do the paramedics know what they do in terms of their policy? They got on the radio and they got to call SPD. SPD, we've been called to a shooting. Is it safe for us to go in there?
Yep.
And they got an answer. And they got an answer from the people on the ground, and they got an answer from SPD. And you can bet SPD was telling them not to fucking go in there because they're being told by the people there, yes, it's fine. Come in now, please. There's no gunman anymore, and someone's dying. But they were being told something else by somebody.
Yeah, and I think just close out on the ambulance in today's just absolutely surreal press conference. They were all playing... who's at fault for this person dying, right? And Scoggins' response, which I thought was absolutely cynical and disgusting, was to blame the actual medics in the CHOP, right? Who, by all accounts, were the only ones actually doing their job, right? Which was keeping this person alive, and who, had a Herculean effort to try and keep this person alive by getting to the hospital.
Drove them to the hospital.
Yeah, actually formed their own ambulance when the ambulance refused to do it, right? And Scoggins went on to claim, I just don't think these people know what they're doing, etc., right? Basically throwing it out there that, it's the medics are the problem. Now, let's keep in mind that just recently, just a week ago, right, these exact same medics literally saved a woman's life who had been shot in the fucking chest by SPD, and they basically were keeping her alive. Yeah, by a grenade. And we're keeping her alive while SPD fired tear gas canisters into the medic's tent.
Well,
right?
that brings us to SPD arriving on the scene.
So, yeah.
So they have said the initial... There's a lot of bullshit with this. The initial timeline...
You'll be surprised that SPD's story is full of holes.
It's absolute bullshit. Their initial timeline, they've said casually everywhere, the mayor, the chief, other people in the SPD, we weren't allowed to get to the victims. Yeah. Again... in a sane world, you don't need to get to the victims. What do you think is gonna? It's like that fucking congressman or whoever it was saying like, "Oh, what are you gonna do when there's a bear walking down the street when you can't call the cops?" It's like, dude, that you don't need. That's no. What are they gonna do? Come shoot the bear? What were they gonna do? Come fucking launch? Well, yeah, we know what they were gonna do because they kept saying that their timeline was bullshit. Saying like their body cams clearly show that they showed up 20 minutes after they were gone.
So their body cams, showed that they were there 20 minutes after the time they claimed that they were there in their report, right? So they directly lied in their report.
Yeah.
Now, the funny part is that body cam footage was released by SPD, and when they released it, the entire thing was a little fuzzy, but most importantly, the time signature on it was made super fuzzy so you couldn't read it, which is not how timestamps work on body cam footage. And actually, I think Spec put together a collage of body cam footage from the last 5 years, and then that one, and the timestamp is crystal clear in all of them because it's not like you're not videotaping the timestamp. It's you know it's done in post or whatever, right? The timestamp they blurred out. They intentionally blurred out the timestamp because they knew they lied about their arrival time and were covering it, right? So this is where it gets to the point of like, did SPD basically, I'm not saying that they shot this guy, but in response to hearing this, basically conspire to do everything they could to make sure they got the worst possible result as part of, again, a propaganda
they were
campaign
ready to do
against
that.
the CHOP.
So best case scenario, they were like, someone's been shot in the CHOP. Let's take a half hour to put on our riot gear, then show up with our guns drawn, demanding to be let through to get to the victims. I mean, which as just a human being, if you're dropped there, you'd have to assume to kill them. Why they weren't let through because they weren't needed, and they had their guns drawn. But listen, I
think it's clear too is that people were angry when they showed up, and what they were angry about was that they were so late in showing up that the medics had already left with the person who was shot long ago, and they were mad that the police was now just getting around to getting down there, right?
Yeah,
and that the police's main job seemed to be roughing people up when they got down there.
Yeah. So they're in their riot gear, but with the addition of their sidearms drawn. And this is a spot where 2 weeks ago they were fucking gassing the whole neighborhood. And like you said, like they shot a woman in the chest with a gas grenade, who was then hauled back to the medic tent by these heroic medics who performed CPR and like resuscitated her heart like 3 times.
This woman died multiple times. And was brought back to life. And by the same people that the fucking head of the fire department was up there blaming for this.
And all the while this is going on, they're trying to save this woman. The cops are shooting fucking flashbangs and tear gas at them at the medic's tent. Okay, this is on video. Like they are. They're trying to kill these people. Okay, that was an attempted murder. Okay. And this insane idea that the cops were, to stand up there and say that they were there to help anybody is absolutely absurd, right? But you have to buy into this entire frame, and that's what this, that's what they're waiting for this to happen to reinforce this frame that I think more and more people are like tuning out of and going like, well, this is bullshit because. They want to stand up there. Amazingly, Carmen Best, like, the city council should really reconsider this ill-thought-out legislation to ban these things because a life could have been saved. And now all we have is clubs and guns. And it's like multiple times she said that at this press conference going like, listen, we will shoot you because that's all that we have left, basically. And that's what that's like... what they're saying, she said, and they were challenged on this, like what could have happened, what would have been different if they still had access to the tear gas. And you said, well, we could have cleared those people out and helped those victims. And it's like, so the scenario you're picturing is you roll in, order a emergency dispersal, start tear gassing everybody, including the medics trying to help those people, like you did before, shooting tear gas into those, cause absolute chaos and violence, and that somehow that was going to save those people on the blocks away on the on the street, whereas we've seen like even with all those tactics, SPD's ability to control a situation is non-existent. They don't that causes chaos, and it doesn't give them control of the street. If they're not going to feel safe to allow the medics in until everyone's fled the area, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's never happened once.
Well, what are we talking about? An hour down the road?
Yeah.
So again, this person's dead, right? Because the police wanted it to be that way.
Absolutely fucking disgusting.
It was some of the most cynical shit I've ever seen at one of these press conferences, which I say every time I watch one of the new ones, but I mean, just astonishing. And the other part of it, too, is this idea of police at the scene would have meant that medical aid could have gotten there faster. And we actually know from history that's just not true, right?
Yeah.
In the case of Tamir Rice and Michael Brown, both cases, the police prevented actual, medical personnel from getting to the scene to ensure that they killed the person. In the case of the shooting at the University of Washington at Trump's inauguration, which I happened to be right there and fucking watched SPD's response when somebody gets shot. The guy that was shot, when people tried to give him medical aid, SPD actually fucking shoved them out of the way. And like they formed a, sort of like riot squad wall when people tried to actually give aid to this guy and just left him bleeding on the fucking ground there in Red Square, right? When people asked SPD to call for an ambulance, they basically just stonewalled them, right? So police don't give you medical aid. I think that's lesson number one. Police aren't going to give you medical aid. So that's where the story begins to fall apart. Then we get into the line about when they were there, the line about the timestamps. And again, this question of who told the ambulance not to show up, right? And that seems to be SPD as well. And it all kind of comes around to, they played this little game, their entire press conference of, who killed why did this person die in the chop or whatever? Mayor Durkin said, it's just tragic that the chop is taking another black life. I mean, one of the absolutely most disgusting moments of the thing. But SPD, stand up, take your spot, you worked hard to make sure that guy died. Take responsibility, take your credit, right? You worked hard. You succeeded at something you wanted to succeed at. You should take your fucking credit for it.
Yeah. Absolutely incredible. Like,
so they got their PR fucking moment,
right, the PR is based on this lazy idea, right, that, look, this, and they said it, Durkin said it, this is, this peaceful protest for this noble goals are being tarnished by this violence that the chop is attracting. And it's like, people pointing this out in the press, someone asked a question about this, but like there are shootings in this town, in other neighborhoods, we do have gun violence in America. Like cops have not been a solution to that. Probably if this had happened on some other street corner and the cops had responded in force to, probably both the guys would have died, okay? Because there wouldn't have been any chop medics to get them to a hospital.
Well, and there was
save one of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe trying to push back on Durkin's actually letting the person die in the chop was the wokest thing we could do. They said, look, people are getting shot in South Seattle, this week, and you didn't care. You haven't had a press conference, you don't give a shit, right? And
the cops didn't prevent that.
Yeah, and the cops didn't prevent it, and shootings go up.
Despite South Seattle being heavily over-policed.
Yeah, and shootings go up during the summer anyways, which we already know. And Durkin's only response was, well, this is different because this was supposed to be a place of peace or some shit like that. It's like, you ordered tear gas to be fired into that place of peace, right? I mean, look, it's
totally cynical, but it gives
cynical horseshit.
She can answer all that, and she can even spend an hour talking about how great the BLM movement is, and blah blah blah, and all these things we're doing. Oh yeah, we need to invest in community. You can do that because the media will run with the basic skeleton of this story. Oh, there's gun violence in the chop, and the cops aren't able to get in there and stop it from happening. Wait, I don't know, or something, I guess.
Yeah. Well, people on the right kept saying, if only there was a police precinct nearby. And I was like, if you get shot, the police precinct is not where you go. You go to a hospital. And that's what the police had specifically prevented from happening. So, on this conspiracy, SPD, take your spot. You were a big part of making this happen. So, fuck you. All right, national conspiracies.
Oh, boy.
All right, so this one's a real weird one. I can't take a side on it, but there's something real strange about it. But there's been reports basically since Juneteenth, of in every major city in America, apparently, wherever these protests are going on, of just fireworks going off all night, just spontaneously.
big like show fireworks.
Yeah, like just all night, spontaneously, everybody in America just decided to do this. It's fucking weird. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm just saying it's a very
Right now,
strange coincidence.
All I can get my hands on is like random fucking screenshots of people's like Facebook posts and on Twitter reports of like, yeah, it's just these a bunch of kids just have mortar shells like that they're just lighting off at 3 a.m. and that they're like, oh, some guy gave it to us. I mean, who knows if any of who knows what to believe this? It's happening in Seattle, but not as much. Like New York seems to be an epicenter of it. Like it's just fucking madness in New York apparently every night now.
Yeah.
But other cities across the country, yeah, it's weird.
It's a weird one. You know, I don't know what to make of it, although I will say that national organizations like the FBI and the CIA have a long history of engaging in very strange games to try and disrupt and disorient left movements. This would not be the weirdest one by far.
No.
This would definitely be just middle of the pack.
Look, and we're ready to absolutely
extremely
say, like, put a
strange.
real pin down on a lot of other shit that's going on being just the local cops wherever it's happening.
Speaking of which,
the lynchings.
there has been a rash of lynchings across America.
Like real old-timey...
Yeah, not just shooting guys and calling it
waking up in
lynching
the morning,
in a fucking tree.
finding black men dangling in
Yeah.
trees.
Which the police have all taken to just unilaterally, universally declaring are suicides.
Which,
Now-
amazing that you think... Now, some of them have had to walk that back finally, but, like, amazing you think you can get away with that. Like,
So, yeah.
like I'm saying, we're not going to investigate this because it's a suicide.
Yeah, 5 years ago, the Texas police officers killed Sandra Bland, right? This is not a fucking debate. Fucking killed Sandra Bland. They killed her one of two ways. They either, when the police officer smashed her head into the fucking street so fucking hard, that killed her, and then they covered it up by hanging her in her cell, or they hung her in her cell while she was still alive, killing her that way. And miraculously, it became a suicide. And it's one of these great moments where we had a national discussion about how, when the police tell you that there's a suicide in their custody, or better yet, if the Bureau of Prisons tells you that somebody committed suicide, that's homicide about 90% of the time. Like, suicide is the cop word for we just killed a guy. And, those people being lynched are being lynched by cops or cop-adjacent people, and I am positive of that.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
Look, I mean, and obviously, we don't need to tell anybody about the history of lynching in this country.
Yeah.
It's never stopped in a way because, I mean, this is what this movement is about black men just being killed in the street. This is, very out, like, this is an older form coming back to strongly say this is about white supremacy by the murderers, whereas normally when the cops do their legal lynchings, that they are, not by our justice system found to be murders, no one's prosecuted for. That's different. They can stand up, say, well, I felt afraid for my life, I had to do this. This is this older form that someone's bringing back to say, no, this is about white supremacy. This is very specific, targeted killings. Some of these, I don't know if all of them, but I know a number of these people have been specifically involved identifiably in the protests, and maybe all of them. Of course, other people have been murdered by other means. Again, we can call that a lynching figuratively as well. In other places, people have been murdered. Fuck, man,
Yeah, it's
from the beginning we were saying this is going to happen, and it's fucking horrible. And this is why this movement has to succeed in crushing the cops, because if they're doing this now with the fucking national spotlight on them, my God, like, they will not stop. If this ends with the cops, like, still having power, the rash of murders will be uncalculable. But the point is, this thing coming back, actually finding black men hanging, being done by cops, how do you know? Well, the thing is, they were always done by cops. The reasons like lynchings were able to just like be such an incredible rash wasn't this idea that the way they were described and mythologized as like an angry mob that gets out of hand. But the reason, and then no one is prosecuted, no one, and the reason is because there were always cops present at these things doing them. making them legitimate, and then everyone agreeing to just not the cops not talking about it. Again, we know like the reason like hate crimes legislation had to exist was to in this moment when the federal government was feeling forced to crack down on some of this, was because in these southern communities where people were getting murdered like this, it was the cops doing it, so the cops were not going to investigate it. So you had to send in the FBI a handful of times to make people feel like something was being done about this.
Usually to arrest their own agents, which is a funny story about the FBI and the Klan. But anyways, the thing being is that, the Klan historically, from its origins in the 1870s to the Second Rise and the Progressive Era, was always cops were the backbone, and the white professional class was the membership, right? And like that has always been the Klan sort of thing. And just because they're probably not walking around in Klan robes now, it's the same group. They didn't get those politics because they put the robes on. They put the robes on because they had those politics, right? And maybe the robes are passe now, and they're just wearing their Blue Lives Matter T-shirts while they do this shit. But let's be serious, it's fucking them.
It's the cops. I mean, come on. It was the cops then. It was the cops now. Probably every single lynching in America, there were cops present.
Oh yeah. 100%.
Absolutely 100%. Now they're, for now anyway, they're having to do it at night in secret with probably just 5 or 6 of them. But so far, no one, haven't heard anything about suspects or security camera footage of these crimes happening. Yeah.
So that gets us, I wanted to talk about those to bring us back to the fact that last night in the CHOP, there was another shooting where a van, apparently unmarked van, drove by and fired at the crowd. I don't know that they hit anybody. It seems to be a little unclear, and drove off.
I think one person was hit. It wasn't. He was listed in critical condition at one point. I think he was hit in the shoulder. I did find that out just before the show.
And I think that this is part of what sort of policing does. It forces you to ask these questions of who could it have been. Right. And I think we have 3 choices, right? It could be a random person, engaging in the gun violence that we just have normalized in the United States, partially through policing. Could it be the police? Right. They didn't get enough juice off of the shooting on Friday. So they came back and did another shooting when they knew they had a big press conference on Monday and we're going to empty the Chaz on Monday.
The built up frustration of the East Precinct not burning down and this thing going wrong on Saturday night or early Saturday morning because it didn't occur to them that the Chaz medics would just take the people to the hospital before they got there.
Yeah.
Right? Now they lied about it, but that didn't occur to them. They thought, well, we can slow roll our ass over there and then get stopped by these people while these people are dying a block away, and then we'll be like, well... Now they're saying that anyway, but there's a real fucking hole in that story.
Yeah. The whole thing on Friday was a photo op that the medics doing their job fucked up by leaving.
The CHOP medics.
The CHOP medics, yeah. No, not the medics in the ambulance. By
just community coming together to try to save some people's lives. Didn't occur to the cops that would happen.
So who could have shot, who could have tried to shoot up the CHOP, right? Random person, police, or... Another one that I actually think is equally likely is these 3, which is any one of the thousands of right-wing freaks all over fucking Facebook who for 2 weeks have been talking about how they're going to go down and do mass shootings in the CHOP. And, nobody seems to care or pay attention to any of this, even though we already had one of them attempt to do it. So maybe it's one of those guys.
Look, that's where we're at.
All right, so that gets us to the next police grievance, which is...
Well, conspiracy.
Yeah.
But this is a conspiracy of the working class against the police.
To deny them of the wonderful sustenance that they need to live. And so there was a woman who...
Well, first of all, this is a broader phenomenon, okay?
Yeah.
So there was the Shake Shack guys, which actually new details came about that today. It just gets... look, there is...
These stories get better.
Cops all over the country are going to fast food places and claiming to be poisoned or fucked with in one way or another. It's always... bullshit. It's a lie. So the Shake Shack guys, at first it was like, nothing really happened. These guys just had some diarrhea or something. Turns out, it came out today, actually, they didn't even drink them. They took like a sip, threw them away, and literally got vouchers for future milkshakes and left, and then blew it up. Look, it's the same guy.
God.
They just lie. Then the police unions in New York.
Did you see that story? The cop who was like all McDonald's,
burger.
Yeah, McDonald's sold me a chicken sandwich, and they took a bite out of it, and it turned out he bit out of the sandwich.
Yeah. No.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that is the story. That's the cover up
Yeah.
that they want you to tell. But you got to think back through that. Okay, so the story was a guy, he blew it up with his command and on Facebook. I was served this. They took a bite out of it. See, he had a picture of a bite out of it.
Yeah.
And then it came out later. Then the police department or the union like got it all over on Facebook, whatever, calling these people out. And then later the guy had to say, "Oh, actually, I forgot. I did take a bite out of it." Does that make sense to you, Brian? Does it make sense that a cop having lied would go back on his lie? Why? Why would he say that? Why would he go back on that?
Well, Greg, I think before you get into your theory,
what?
We should tell the McMuffin story.
No, hang on.
Okay.
It's simple. He blew this shit up on Facebook, and just like the Starbucks cup with pig written on it, he did it to like play the victim. He wanted to get these service workers in trouble just for his own grievance gratification. It was a fucking lie from the beginning. He had to cover his ass and say he forgot he took a bite out of it when in fact he knew he took a bite out of it deliberately to lie, because there's fucking cameras in a fucking fast food restaurant. So when the first thing, that's a really easy thing to see. Like, is it a whole burger going in, getting wrapped and being passed through the drive-through window? Yes, it is. And when confronted with that, like, he had to be like, "Oh, that's right. Fuck, I forgot. I took a bite and put it away for later." Bullshit. It was just another fucking lie. Just like these guys at the fucking Shake Shack. It was just a fucking lie.
Oh, yeah.
But what's funny about this is they've had this fucking persecution complex for years, and this is one of the ways they've manifested it. But now, as people are turning against them, they're really hopped up on it, and that compounded with all the previous lies that are spread throughout police communities, they're all convinced of this because they all keep lying about it, and now they're like, holy shit, everyone does hate me. So this woman, you've probably all seen the video. I only want to bring it up. Everybody fucking talked about this because it's so funny. I only bring it up because I swear to God, similar to the bite out of the cheeseburger, but actually more so, everyone has gotten this video wrong, okay? And it's simultaneously less stupid.
Real quickly, the McMuffin cop ordered her egg McMuffin. They told her, "Oh shit, it's it's taking a little longer. Go,"
because she ordered it online.
Yeah,
she made a point of saying in the video, she's doing a car video where she's teary. She's getting teary because she's like, "I paid ahead. I paid ahead online because I don't like when people buy my shit for me."
Yeah, fuck her.
Which all is just right there. You're like, "Oh, so your normal life experience
so
is
fucking much already."
Police. So that, like, the disconnect these people have. Like, you have a profession where, in fact, for years, people have just, if you don't pay for shit before you get there, someone in the drive-through line will literally be like, "Oh, I'll pay for the cop behind me." Okay, that's
or the store feels forced to comp you.
Right.
Kind of like when a large Italian man in the 1950s used to come to your store. You were forced to comp them, forthright.
Like the guy they killed in, was it Kentucky? No.
Oh, the barbecue guy.
The barbecue guy who had
Yeah.
to sign up, cops eat for free, right? And he got killed. But he had to do that because you have to keep good relations with the cops, right? So this is one thing businesses are forced to do, give away free food. So that's the world this woman's actually operating in, okay? But she's like, "I paid ahead because, I don't like to do that." Okay, good for you. And she said she then, she gets up there. They didn't have her order ready. So to keep the line moving, this is the thing that's always normally
everybody knows how this
She pulled
works.
over, and she had to wait for her food. And this is where people get confused. People think what she's saying is, "I pulled over." And people think she's butthurt about not getting her food in time. People think she's butthurt about having to pull over to the side and wait, which, again, happens all the time. People think she's then gets paranoid, like, "They're taking so long to make my food. Is it because they're, like, pooping in it or something?" This is all very stupid. Here's the thing I'm here to tell you. It's actually not that dumb. She's actually not that stupid. But it's actually better, okay? She doesn't believe in it. That's not her complaint. She's just laying out the circumstances and telling you, she actually is telling you that she paid for it just to emphasize how big a choice it was for her to leave without getting the food. Because what she does in the end is she's freaking out, saying, "I had to just leave because I was overwhelmed with this fear that they were doing something to my food. And the issue was not the time. It wasn't because of the time.
Yeah.
It wasn't because she was taken out of the line because she had to wait. No. She's just overwhelmed with this fear that but she was ready to face that. That morning, getting off a long shift, she wanted her Egg McMuffin before she went home. So she was ready to just like go and get it, eat her food, and be gone. But having been made to wait, sit there, looking at the restaurant, looking at the line of cars, the anxiety grew inside her to the point to having to sit with it. Just it overwhelmed her that she was just too terrified that her food was being poisoned. Not because it was not the evidence of having to pull off to the side. She was just overwhelmed with fear because she has now internalized falsely that service workers are pooping in cops' food, but correctly that she is utterly despised by all of society. And she had to sit with that for a minute, and it got to her, and she left without getting the food she paid for and went and cried into a Facebook post.
Yeah.
That's what happened in that video, okay?
Now, I will say, there is a very famous restaurant in San Antonio that cops eat at a lot, and I won't say the name of it. But my brother worked there, and I know other people work there. And this is back in the 90s even, they were saying, every time a cop shows up, the waitstaff makes sure to mark it on the ticket that's for the police. And let me tell you guys, if you're paranoid that they're doing stuff to your food, they are. I got news for you. They are.
Yeah, but it's not something...
You've eaten a lot of spit, a lot of ball hair.
Yeah.
A lot of,
finger and ass, I'm sure.
A cop's diet is like 40% spit, basically.
Yeah. Which is like... But they have to make up these fucking lies because they can't catch anyone on this.
Oh, yeah, because if you spit on, and somebody see a taco or whatever, they can't fucking tell. And, by the time he gets at the table, they don't know the difference.
Yeah.
I probably should.
That's not going to make them sick.
Yeah, so,
It might now.
Yeah, and I think that what needs to be, we need to turn their fear into reality, though.
Yeah, it's good. It's
good.
getting through to them. They are they're terrified to go out in public in their uniforms in a lot of cities,
and they should
unless they're in a phalanx.
Yeah, this should be. I mean, this should be like walking around in your like Nazi uniform and like 1980s or something. Like people should throw rotten fruit at you.
It should be the scene in the Blues Brothers when the Illinois Nazis are marching. The cops are holding back the crowd, protecting the Nazis. The Illinois Nazis marching through with the cops holding back a crowd that is just baying, just frothing, tossing things at them, screaming at them, of just a bunch of like random suburban Illinois white people just screaming at the Illinois Nazis. That is how it should be every time a cop walks outside.
Yeah, I remember when this is probably around the Jasper. Anyways, this is in like the early to mid 90s. The Ku Klux Klan did a little fucking rally in San Antonio. Not a normal thing. And everybody in town basically went down. It was everything that they could throw. They were just chucking at these fucking Klan members. And I saw the next day, like in the paper, the funny like list of things that like were thrown. Like they gave like an itemized list of items thrown at the Klan, which was everything from batteries, bricks, rocks, to a watch. Like somebody like literally threw everything and it looked at their wrist and was like, fuck it. Threw the fucking watch.
He ran out of ammo.
Yeah, and I mean when people talk about like what happened to the Klan, like no law enforcement got rid of the Klan. Like what got rid of the Klan was every time they went out in those robes, people threw shit at them. And the police should have the same fucking experience, right?
Well, here's the thing.
The
Klan just marched. The Klan just did a march in Georgia, I think.
Yeah, they've actually become more acceptable in the last 20 years. But people should think about that.
It's that, but also the cops are. Time has passed such that the cops are now, they totally understand their role and are totally covered by the powers that fund them and by the media to protect right-wing mobs like that. So they will stand there in full riot gear and protect and fuck with counter-protesters who are trying to yell at or throw shit at any right-wing group, including the Klan. And the cops protected them in Georgia, of course. And, if you'd thrown anything at him, you got a fucking wall of fucking cops coming at you, beating the shit out of you. Yeah.
Well, this is my point of why we need to start throwing the things at the police instead, right? So this begins with spitting in their food. Parody.
Yeah, look, if they want to back up the Klan when they march,
Yeah.
that's fine. Just compress them into one march.
There you go.
Cops and Klan hand in hand, and
There
just
you go.
just do
Just like the old days.
Give them all the same treatment.
Yeah. So, so good to all our fast food workers out there doing the Lord's work. Don't make this a paranoid dream for the cops. Make it reality. Like,
look, they already believe it, so
yeah,
it's all good.
Yeah, they already think you're fucking with their food. They're already blaming you for it, so you might as well, get out there and do the deed. But parody. So, anyways, I've learned that we can say that because we have a lawyer and she's okayed it. So
Right. Okay.
All right,
this
well-
is probably gonna be a long one. Thanks for listening, everybody.
yeah,
Is
thanks
that
for
it,
listening.
Brian?
I was just gonna say thanks to Colin wherever you are.
On
Hopefully
your
we'll-
vision quest out
Yeah,
there.
hopefully we get another message from him as he reaches the top of the mountain. Hi Colin, miss you.
Yeah, we know.